very interesting story that kind of dovetails with my psychic career, but I didn't realize it at that time. I was a big fan of Doc Savage. The original writer visited his widow, and I went through his files, and I found an outline to a Doc Savage novel that was never written. And I got permission from her to turn it into a novel to see if we could sell it. So I took this outline, I wrote a little prologue. I said, well, that went okay. And I wrote the first chapter, and that went okay. And I wrote the second chapter, and that went okay. So I'm typing away on the third chapter, and I could feel a presence standing behind me. And I didn't look around, and I didn't question it, but all of a sudden I felt this energy, and I started typing away a mile a minute. And I wrote like 3 chapters that day. And the next day I wrote 4, and the next day I wrote 5, or something like that. And now I look back at it and I say to myself, well, who could that be? Well, it could only be the original writer. His widow was living on Social Security. She didn't have any other income. And if we sold this book, which we ultimately did, she would get a chunk of it. And it went on to other books. And so, I think that might have been the first experience I ever had that was mediumistic. And that's how I wrote my first novel. I think it's important to understand that psychic readings and psychic work done correctly is supposed to be empowering. It's supposed to give people information or knowledge that is helpful to them and helpful to the people around them. I didn't know that world, and so I thought it was just about being psychic. It's really about being a helpful guide to people, to empower them. That it isn't always about accuracy, because sometimes if you put information in someone's hands, it changes what they were going to do, and the outcome becomes different. The bright future may be on the other side of dark clouds, and I don't like to think about that. I don't care for dark clouds or destruction or Armageddon or some of the things people talked about before turnings. Civilizations have a building phase, an established phase, an unraveling phase, and a catastrophic phase. And 25 years ago, he says we're in the unraveling phase. And looking at the world, especially what's going on in the last few years, we are certainly unraveling, and if there's a catastrophic phase ahead of us, it could be pretty bad. So I'm seeing sausages and fried eggs, and then I'm seeing a ring. And the ring is very slim. It makes me think of an engagement ring or a wedding ring.
Hi guys, I'd like to welcome to the podcast Will Murray. He's a writer. He's most known, I think, for writing the character of Squirrel Girl, if you know her. He's also a psychic, and he works on just doing psychic readings and clearing energy in homes. So we're going to talk a little bit with Will today. So welcome, Will.
Thank you for inviting me, Kim. It's nice to be here.
Yeah, thanks for coming on. So was there anything major I missed in the introduction? Is there anything else you want to let people know about who you are?
Although I am known for creating Squirrel Girl, my comic book writing career is very small compared to the nearly, 90 books I've written, novels and nonfiction books, as well as the 20-something years where I spent interviewing celebrities on movie locations all over the world for various science fiction and adventure film magazines and horror film magazines. I'm also well known in the H.P. Lovecraft scholarship circles for my scholarly articles, as well as popular fiction in general. I've interviewed a lot of writers and artists in the comic book world, as well as participating as a creator. So I'm I'm accomplished in a number of directions. So it's sort of interesting to do an interview because we could focus on any one and spend the entire interview just focusing on that one area.
Yeah, wow. So, well, let me ask you one question that I was thinking of. I kind of wonder, like, what inspires you most, like, to get into like all these different areas of interest, like writing and then getting into psychic studies and stuff.
Well, I'm a child of the '60s, so I grew up in on Marvel Comics when they were just starting, and of course there was great TV shows that were in the areas I liked, adventure, science fiction, fantasy, and movies as well. And I think, like a lot of baby boomers, I was saturated with new and unusual ideas in music, stories, books, and film. And, these things fired my imagination. And as I grew up, I slowly but steadily became involved in the creative side of things. First, writing for fanzines, which is how a lot of writers in my field start, and then graduating to writing professionally.
That's
As
awesome.
far as what sparks me is its imagination. It's the unusual. It's not the ordinary. It's the stuff that's outside of the ordinary that always grabs my attention and holds it.
So, when you're getting into that, what kind of things does your imagination consist of that like kind of got you started in that area?
Well, I've always been interested in heroes. In comics, Superman, and then Captain America and Spider-Man and stuff. And so people who are heroes who are altruistic but also unusual, um, they inspire me to write about those characters and to emulate them in terms of how I live my life, to be a positive person and a person who helps others. But on the creative side, it's again to go outside the boundaries of what most people, back in those days would consider ordinary. I note with some surprise that over the course of the many decades I've been involved in the creative field, the things that I started to be interested in, like Marvel Comics, just for one example, used to be a niche, and now it's part of the global popular culture consciousness. You know,
Big time.
and this sort of happened while I was involved with it, but it was happening at such a slow pace that I didn't realize what was happening until I realized one day that all this stuff that used to be my kid stuff is now the world. You know, Marvel Comics dominates the popular culture in some senses, just as DC Comics does, and so does horror and science fiction, which used to be niche. So
Yeah, so cool. It's the hero's journey, right? It's like everybody kind of like has that feeling of like your inner hero that you can relate to that story. And
I used to joke, there used to be a saying, "You are what you eat." I think I am what I read. What I
mm,
read growing up. I've been writing some of my favorite characters
wow.
as an adult that I read as a kid, and without any idea or any ambition to do so. It just unfolded that way.
Yeah, I think sometimes people forget reading is a form of consumption. So it is like it really is that. You
It
are what you
molds
eat.
you. It molds you.
Yeah.
It clearly does.
Yeah. So I have a friend, Bill, who is a Marvel fan, and I asked him for some questions for you. So I'm gonna read you his questions.
Sure.
Um, he's curious to know what inspired you to create the character of Squirrel Girl.
I had a girlfriend back in the '80s who was into animal rescues, and she uh, we I think the trigger was we went to church one day in the winter, and she was wearing a heavy coat that she didn't take off, and we're in the service, and at one point in the middle of the service, she's unzipped her coat and a little baby squirrel head popped out. And, I had no idea it was there. She had rescued a baby squirrel and was keeping it warm, but keeping it in her coat.
Oh my
And a
god.
friend of mine jokingly referred to her as Squirrel Girl. And the name stuck with me for a long time, but I didn't do anything with it. And then one day I was writing I had been writing a paperback series called The Destroyer. They made a movie about it many years ago. Remo Williams' The Adventure begins with Fred Ward and Jill Gray. It was very popular on cable for a long time. And one day I was doing the Destroyer comic book for Marvel as part of the license. And one day my editor asked me if I would write a fill-in issue of Iron Man. And I said, sure. And I thought about what I wanted to do. And I wanted to pit him against Dr. Doom. But I wanted to do a story that was not just the two. And I thought about Squirrel Girl. And I said, what if the catalyst for the story is Squirrel Girl, a 15-year-old girl with the powers of a squirrel and could talk to squirrels and has a squirrel army. So she, she's 15. She has a crush on Iron Man, and she doesn't know who he is. You can't see behind the mask. And she presents herself as Iron Man's future partner. And of course, Tony Stark is a full-grown adult, and this is a little girl. And, he's humoring her, and then Dr. Doom comes along and captures them both. And Iron Man can't get out of the shackles they put him in. But Squirrel Girl calls for squirrels, and they descend upon Dr. Doom's little ship he's got everybody captured in, and they rip the wiring apart and save everybody. So that's the origin of Squirrel Girl. And she was initially kind of a joke, but after a while they started using her more seriously, and then they found an interesting way to make her work as a character, because the conceit that developed around her is she could mysteriously defeat all these super powerful villains like Thanos, but they never showed you in the comic book how she did it. And they finally started showing that she actually talked these guys out of being bad guys instead of fighting them and defeating them by sheer strength. So she had a completely new approach. She's known for being super optimistic and super positive. And so she's become kind of a female empowerment character over the years. I know that's a long answer to a short question. That's the story.
Oh, I love it. Wow, that's a really cool story. And I love also that you kind of mentioned that, like, she almost started as a joke. But, like, I think that just, like, bringing humor into life is, like, such a superpower.
Yeah.
Like, just that, like, intention. And then, you don't never know what's going to come out of it.
Even though I write action adventure stories for the most part, they're known for their humor. Doc Savage, which is a 1930s character that I've continued, has humorous elements to it. And the Destroyer series was political satire as well as fantasy and martial arts. And that had a lot of humor. And so one of my gifts is the ability to bring humor into stories that are normally just deadpan serious, because I think they need it. And I think that sets them apart from the general run of gritty and, serious square-jawed heroes. I think heroes should be able to laugh at themselves and be laughed at sometimes.
I love that. It's important. Yeah. So another question from Bill. He wants to know, what is your process for writing stories in comics or in general?
It's hard to say, because I tend to be more of an inspired writer than a mechanical writer. Ideas pop up from anywhere. Sometimes they're just, you're in the shower and something comes to you, and sometimes you're reading something and you think, well, that triggered something. It's almost impossible to encapsulate what does it, because sometimes it's taking two elements and putting them together. For instance, I write Sherlock Holmes stories for various anthologies, and then I collect them into my own books. It's called The Wild Adventures of Sherlock Holmes. And I was reading a few years about a little boy who disappeared. And they found him many years ago, stuck in the chimney of a deserted house. He had not been kidnapped, which is what they thought. He had not fallen into a pond and drowned. He had climbed down the chimney of this deserted house to explore it. He got stuck, and no one could hear him. And they found his body years later.
Wow.
And even though that's a modern story, I thought that would be a good mystery for Sherlock Holmes. A little boy goes missing. Is it a kidnapping? Did he run away from home? And so I just took that idea and planted it back in the Victorian age. And instead of the typical Sherlock Holmes mystery, which is kind of cut and dried, it was more of an emotional mystery because the parents want the child to be found alive. And when Sherlock Holmes figures out how to do it, it's like it's not a happy ending. It's very emotional, but the mystery is solved. Holmes figures out the only place the child would be in that chimney. No one thought of it because they're not Sherlock Holmes. So that's one example. There are many.
Yeah. That's so cool. Yeah. Inspiration, you never know when it's going to hit. That's
right.
It's awesome. Okay, I got a couple more from Bill. So
Sure.
He says, if you encountered any challenges creating Squirrel, or did you encounter any challenges creating her? And what kind of themes are you trying to convey with your stories?
Well, I think originally my editor was a little uncertain about this character because she was outside of what they were doing then, which was very grim and gritty. And I wanted the artist named Steve Ditko to draw the first Squirrel Girl story. He was famous for co-creating Spider-Man and Doctor Strange. And at that point in his career, he was not considered a hot artist anymore. But I thought he would be a wonderful artist because he's the one who designed Iron Man's second armor, the one that's more or less seen to this day in various forms, the red and gold armor. And so I had to talk the editor into, these two things because they were a little unorthodox in terms of what, the commercial thinking was back then, which is, I think, 1989 or so.
All right.
And, I think you always, when you're dealing with editors, you have to convince them the idea is not only good, but it can be executed in a way that's commercial.
Okay, so I'm wondering, how did you kind of, get into the world of comic book writing specifically? Because, what kind of writing did you start with, and how did you end up in comic writing?
I started with fanzine writing, which graduated into writing books, novels. My first major gig, I'll go back, and my first major gig was Ghosting the Destroyer paperback series, of which I did 41 or 2 of those. And I did that when I interviewed the original writers who liked my interview and asked me to write a nonfiction book on the Destroyer, which led to ghostwriting the series. But before that, I have a very interesting story that kind of dovetails with my psychic career, but I didn't realize it at that time. I was a big fan of Doc Savage, a 1930s character, which I now have written a bunch of novels. And I visited the original writer was named Lester Dent, and I visited his widow, and I went through his files. And I found an outline from 1934 to a Doc Savage novel that was never written, which I thought was a tremendous thing to find. I was very excited by it. And I got permission from her to turn it into a novel to see if we could sell it. Wow. And I'd never written a novel before. I'd written a few short stories. And I hadn't been published all that much except in nonfiction. So I took this outline, which was about 10, 12 pages long, and on my little Olivetti portable typewriter, which is what I was using then, this would have been 1979, I wrote a little prologue. I said, well, that went okay. And I wrote the first chapter, and that went okay. And I wrote the second chapter, and that went okay. On the third day or fourth day I was working on this, I'm typing away on the third chapter, and I could feel a presence standing behind me. And I didn't look around, and I didn't question it, but all of a sudden I felt this energy, and I started typing away a mile a minute. And I wrote 3 chapters that day. And the next day I wrote 4, and the next day I wrote 5 or something like that. And after that, I was exhausted for a week. I had to stop. And when I resumed the book, it was a chapter or 2 a day at a normal pace. And, I remember thinking how strange that was. But I didn't have my spiritual understanding then. And I didn't question it. And now I look back at it and I say to myself, well, who could that be? Well, it could only be the original writer. Because, his widow was living on Social Security. She didn't have any other income. And if we sold this book, which we ultimately did, she would get a chunk of it.
Wow.
And it went on to other books. And so, I think that might have been the first experience I ever had that was mediumistic, even though it was not consciously mediumistic. And that's how I wrote my first novel.
Oh, I love that. That's an awesome story. So cool.
Thank you. Thank you.
I also want to comment on like how cool that is that you even, if people growing up now, they would be like, well, what's he doing? He went to a house. Like, you're doing investigative research. People nowadays, I feel like, don't really know how to do that kind of stuff.
I don't know, it could be, but don't forget that, those of us who do investigative research have essentially kind of covered the field. In some areas, there's not much to do that we haven't already done or at least started. But I think that's not entirely correct. If you look in the media, people are this is something I've noticed in the last decade or so. People are not as interested in stories as they used to be, as much as they're interested in the story and then the story behind the story. If someone sees a movie they like, they want to know, well, how did that come about? Instead of saying that was a great movie, there are people who want to interview the director, the screenwriter, producers. Say, okay, how did this come about? This is a really good movie, or a really unusual movie. And I think there's a big interest in the story behind the story, which I've been doing for decades. When people weren't doing it in my area, the pulp magazine and the comic book area, I've done a lot of articles on Marvel Comics where I've broken ground and said, well, must be what's going on behind the scenes then that they never talked about. Because look at all these pieces that fit together, and you realize, oh yeah, that must be what's going on. So I disagree. I think people are interested in doing this, but I think a lot of the work is being done by a small number of people.
Yeah.
And the people who do the work, they do it right. There's not much room to follow up by other people because the main research has been done or is being done.
Yeah, that's a fair point for sure.
And I think writers are being interviewed more than they used to in the context of how, where do you get your ideas? Like, the typical question, but also, how'd your career start? I think there's always been interest in writers, but in the film field and the TV field, not as much until relatively recently. It's always the actors or sometimes the directors. Now people want to talk to the producers, the special effects people, and the script writers. Where did these ideas come from? How did this movie come to pass? Because some of the stories are very complex and interesting, and you wouldn't know it just from watching the movie or the TV show.
Yeah, that's true. It's fun to, when you do feel that pull. Like, I feel like, from like what I was trying to say is that, like, I feel like, with the internet and everything, things come easy to most people, so a lot of people won't like kind of go out of their way. But
that's true.
But it is cool, and I think that is the way of the future, just like digging into like really trying to understand things in detail and the creation process, because that is how we channel source, I think. Just any act of creation.
I agree. I absolutely agree. It's not always conscious, but that's how we do it. Or that's how a lot of people do it. There are people who do it mechanically and with greater effort, but those of us who do it sort of through spirit, it flows and it happens more easily.
Yeah. Cool. So let's talk a little bit more about like your medium experience, your psychic experience. So like you talked about that awesome story, which was really cool. So, it's like everything like really worked out in that situation, and it feels like divinely guided.
Yeah, so, absolutely.
When you think like, as your gifts evolved, do you like, have you thought back on like moments like throughout your life that kind of like hinted that there was something, maybe not something special about you, but you had some kind of special like attunement or some kind of...
Yeah, I mean, it took a very long time for me to start to assemble pieces, but I have had unusual experiences. I remember one of my earliest unusual experience, before I became actively involved in the psychic world, the spiritual world, is I was leaving my high school for the last time at the end of the school year in May or June or whatever of 1969. And I've been going to that high school, I think, only a year. And as I'm walking out the main entrance and down the stairs, it just hit me out of the blue. I'm never coming back to this school. And I kind of shook it off because there was no inkling of that in my life. My parents had been looking at moving like 3 years before. They'd looked at houses, but then they stopped. And they hadn't brought up the subject since. And so that would have been May, June of that year. And by August 1, we had moved out of Boston to another city. And so I had a presentiment that I was never going back to my high school and seeing all my high school friends, but I didn't know where it came from. I understood it on the level of, I get what I'm feeling. I don't get why I'm feeling it, and I don't know that it's true. That's one example. Another example that, also goes to school, when I had moved to the present city I'm living in and gone to a new high school, one of my art teachers had the same last name of one of my friends from Boston. It turned out, when I looked into it, it was his sister. And I remember being at his house and being in his basement looking at his ant farm, and all these sculpts were on the shelves. And I said, "What's that?" And I said, "My sister. She's studying art. She's going to be an art teacher, and that's her work." And so here I am. I'm in her class, and one of the things she has us do is work in clay. So I decided I would try to make a head of Doc Savage, the character I was reading at that time that I would later write. So I made a Doc Savage head as best I could, impressionistic. I wasn't a great artist, but it had human features. And we let it sit over a 3-day weekend, and it had sunk and flattened. Not completely, but it was out of shape. So instead of having the heroic jaw, it was sticking out. Instead of having a heroic forehead, it was sloped back. And I salvaged it as much as I could, and we fired it, and I spray painted it a nice bronze color to give it a look, and put it on a shelf. And then a few years later, I'm in the working world, and I'm working in this working environment, sort of a factory environment. And I'm working. My supervisor is this guy who, his first name is Don as opposed to Doc. It's one letter difference. And one day I'm rummaging around the back of my closet, and I come across this clay head, and I look at it. I said, "It's like Don, the supervisor." And I kind of threw it away. But every time I looked at the head, I said, "That really looks like him. It's got the same brow, same forehead, the same kind of hair, the same kind of jaw." One week he went on vacation. I took the clay head into work and showed it to everybody. And I said, "That's him."
Wow.
"Did you just do that?" I said, "No, I did that in high school." Nobody believed me. I can't explain that story because it doesn't make any sense. I didn't flatten the head. I salvaged it from being flattened. That's one of the many weird things that happens to me that don't make that to me have some resonance with what we're talking about. Now, I'll say this. Working in that factory inspired me to get out of the working world, go to college, which started me on the path to being a writer. But Don didn't have anything to do with it particularly. But that's just another way. So that's the kind of experience I might have.
Yeah. Wow. It's so interesting, like the levels of connection that we have, and
Yeah.
we don't really understand them from where we are, but before we came into this life, it's like we planned a lot of this stuff, right? Do you feel that way?
I don't know that I agree or disagree because I see signs of randomness as as, and there are levels and layers of this, and we may be planning in our sleep and changing plans, so that people talk about that possibility. But yeah, I think a lot, I think the argument between free will and predestination probably means that both are active, because I don't believe in binary choices. It seems to me that you can make choices, but you also may have a life path, but you may have some fluidity on that life path, including the ability to screw up as well as make excellent choices.
I think so too. So cool. So So now you kind of are a psychic as it's almost like part of your daily work, right? Are you doing it pretty often now?
Well, what I did is I ended up at a crossroads at a certain point and moved into the psychic and away from the writing, and then gradually swept around back into the writing more and more intensively. So I had this interlude where it was just mostly psychic work, and that's a wild story. And I can try to compress it for you, maybe, but it's pretty wild. I started writing a book about this, and I said some of this is just too pat. But if you'd like, I would tell you how at the age of 44 I became a professional psychic. Would you like to hear that?
I would love to hear it, yeah.
Okay. I was involved with a woman who's very psychic, and she wasn't a professional, but she demonstrated the ability to me many times. And one day she invited me to come to her house for a tarot reading party where she was inviting a professional reader. And she needed 10 people in order for her to get a free reading, and I would have to pay for my reading. I said, to humor her, I said yes. I had no knowledge of tarot cards or that stuff. I considered myself intuitive and maybe psychic, but not operationally so, passively so. So this woman read me, and she impressed the hell out of me. And I was having problems with a publisher. And she said to me in the middle of that, "Don't rock the boat," which was what my editor said just like a week before. And I thought, that's interesting. And however, I rocked the boat and ended up quitting that book series.
Oh boy.
And being unemployed for a while, which was probably for the best. And this woman and I parted company. And I was sort of at loose ends for a while. But I'd become very interested in psychic work. Okay. And there was a place at the other end of this city that was a reading room, a tarot parlor, as they sometimes call them. And I got a couple of readings there, and I was impressed by the people there. But I was like a little baffled by tarot cards and not so sure about some of the people who call themselves professional psychics. And one day I had this strong feeling to buy a deck of tarot cards. And I did. And I got a book on the subject. And I'm fooling with these cards. And a friend of mine, another writer, called me in the middle of this. And I'm talking to him. He's complaining about a problem he has in his life, which all writers have and all people have. And I'll compress this a little. But as I'm listening to I heard a voice in my head say, "Ask him if he's wearing a shirt, a blue shirt." And I said, "Are you wearing a shirt?" He said, "Yeah." Is it colored blue? I said, "Yeah." I said, "That's interesting." And I started reading him with the cards. Now, at this point, I didn't know the cards. I didn't know the meanings. I just read him just sort of purely intuitively. And the advice I gave him may or may not have been any good, but the insights I gave him held his attention. And I thought, that's weird. Who was talking to me, and what was that about? And I started reading friends, and this would have been August 1997. And I got very, very interested in this and working with the cards and trying to understand what was going on with me. And I could feel some shift going on in me that I couldn't comprehend. And I had an editor friend in the West Coast that I was telling these stories to, and he was very open-minded. He would listen, and he'd give me some insights and stuff. One day I'm talking to him and said, if I could get into that tea room where these professional readers read, I'd like to know what's going on with them if they're having the experiences I have. Are they coming from the same type of experiences? The next day I walk to the mailbox, the post office to mail him a package or something. And I'm on foot. So I decided I'd go to the supermarket and grab some groceries. And because I was on foot, I called a cab. This is the next day. And I get this young cab driver, talkative as hell, saying it's his first day and his meter's broken. Do I know the fare to my house? And I said, I do. I do it all the time. And so he's talking about this is his first day, and he's really a musician, and he has a third job. And I said, "What's the third job?" He said, I'm a reader at the tea room. I said, "Really? I'm interested in that place." He said, "Well, they're looking for phone readers. I can put in a work for you." So he set up an appointment, and I went in and I told the woman who ran the place my story, and she was very skeptical. But she says, "Well, we need phone readers. We'll come in on Monday, and let's see what happens." So I came in on Monday, and it was a slow day. It wasn't until the end of my shift that I actually got a call, and I read the caller for 15 minutes, and he extended for another 15 minutes, and they came running in with a contract, and suddenly I was a professional psychic.
Oh.
That doesn't just happen. That's like the universe turning gears
Yeah.
and opening up paths so you can follow, your own path. And that's how it started.
Wow.
And after that, I trained in remote viewing, and I trained in mediumship, and I started doing more and more things, and I started teaching psychic development and teaching remote viewing. And it was a wild ride. It was very absorbing. It was exactly what I needed, because I needed a break from writing, because at that point I'd probably written 50 books, in a relatively short period of time.
Wow. That was really, really cool how you got into that. So.
And talking to other psychics, I hear stories somewhat like that. People who would go in for a reading, and the reader would look at the cards and said, "You should be working here. Why don't you come in back and we'll test you?" And they would get hired that way, and they didn't come in for a job; they came in for a reading.
Wow.
One medium I know, heard in his head, "Go to the tea room," and he never went there before. And he went there and got a reading, and they hired him. And that stuff happens. People it's a calling, like the priesthood or music or whatever. It's like it's something you're called to do, and if you're called to do it, you ought to be doing it.
Yes. Wow. There's so many. So I'm thinking of people generally, like if they're feeling like they feel like extra intuitive or like really in tune with their like spirit guides or anything, like they would probably have a pretty direct like sign or something, right? Like it kind of just it's like you said, it kind of just happens if you're meant to be doing something like that.
Yeah, I think it does. But free will does play a role. You can resist it. You can delay it. You can put it off completely. You can go down a different path, and the universe will say, "Okay, if you choose to go here instead of there, I guess we have to support you in that, because that's your free will choice."
Yeah.
You may not be as happy or as fulfilled, but everybody has a right, or economic circumstances could say, "Well, I want to be this. I want to be a singer, but I have a family support, or I have a sick relative to take care of, and I can't do what I feel like I'm meant to do because I have obligations." So we have to be realistic about the tension between what we want to do, what we're meant to do, and the other choices that may affect that.
Yeah. So, what would you say to someone who like feels like they're intuitive, but I feel like a lot of people now like are kind of like upgrading their systems and becoming more intuitive, but we're kind of in a place in the world now, I feel like, where a lot of people don't trust their own intuition. So how would you tell someone to like try to start trusting in your intuition more? Or, like how can I trust my intuition?
There's it's trial and error to some degree. I mean, you don't want to, if you have an intuition to invest your life savings in a certain stock, I would maybe resist that unless you have a proven track record with yourself and you feel really strongly. But in little things, if you have an intuition, I need to go see this movie, or I need to, take an art class or something, or I need to, change, stop drinking coffee or cigarettes or whatever. You can do it with things that are not impactful to test the guidance, shall we say, and see if you get more comfortable, because the psychic stuff is sometimes very subtle. You have to learn to trust it. You have to learn when to trust it, and you have to be able to discern the difference between a little tug in a direction and your desire to go in a direction. Your hunger for something, your yearning for something. the two can coincide, but it's really learning how strong your intuition is when it comes to when it can come to play, and when it when it is validation is the only way to learn to trust it. I felt like I had to do this. I did this, and this happened. It was great.
Yeah.
It worked. Okay. So, I think being open to it, but I think, it's a learning process, and it can be challenging because if it gets stronger and your intuition pulls you in more decisive directions, and they say you should quit this job and do something else, well, that's a tightrope act that, can affect other people, and you have to be mindful of what's the impact if I do this,
Yeah.
They used to throw kids into swimming pools to teach them to swim, and the first thing the kids do is learn to float. And it works to a degree, but maybe you want to teach them to swim in a less abrupt
without traumatizing them.
way. Yeah, without traumatizing them.
Yeah.
Because you don't need to traumatize someone to teach them to learn to swim.
Wow, that feels like a big wisdom drop. I like that. And you mentioned you do remote viewing. So what does that mean to people who haven't heard of that before?
Remote viewing is a structure that was developed by a group of scientists for the U.S. government. Now 30-something years ago, it was a super secret thing for a long time. It became a program that was ultimately known as Project Stargate. And I trained with one of the military, because they were mostly military guys who were trained to do remote viewing. Back in the late 90s, the program was exposed and supposedly disbanded, and the military remote viewers took their skills out into the commercial world and began teaching law enforcement professionals and then civilians. And I was in one of the early groups when this happened. And I was first working as a professional psychic, and I found the book by my instructor, Psychic Warrior by David Morehouse. And a reader I worked with pointed me towards one of Omega Institute's Boston outreach programs. They were having a one-day remote viewing training session in a church in Boston, of all places. So I bought a ticket and I went to it, and I did really well in remote viewing the target they gave us.
Wow.
And a year later, I went to Omega Institute in upstate New York, and did a week's training in was then called coordinate remote viewing, and later that summer did a week's training in extended remote viewing. And I'm setting this up. There are two types of remote viewing: coordinate remote viewing, which I think is now called controlled remote viewing. You're sitting up in a chair, and they give you the coordinates of the target. The coordinates I'm not going to explain right now, but they're not like longitude and latitude. They're something different. And you're supposed to write down in a very structured way that they train you to do what the target, not what the target is, but what you feel about the target, your perceptions of the target. And it starts with just the general idea of it's a man-made structure, or it's a water, or it's a land-water interface. And then you move into textures, colors, senses, and other sensory things. Then you start sketching and drawing it, and there's more to it than that. The other kind of remote viewing, extended remote viewing, which I do the most now, is when it's like out of body work. It's like you're lying down, you get into a altered state, and they give you the coordinates, and you go to the target in more of a shamanistic way. It's a journey, and you drop into the target zone, which could be anything, here or outside the planet, technically, and you experience it. You move around in that environment, and you come back, and then you write a summary of what you saw. And that I find useful when people, lose objects, a wallet, a purse, a keys, or whatever. Although you can do that with tarot cards, you can do that with, just visualization. And remote viewing is a scientific structure for what used to be called traveling clairvoyance, which is essentially another way of saying you cast your mind to another location and you observe what's going on there. And so that part of it's been around a long time, but it's the extended remote viewing, I understand it, is based on Native American shamanistic practices. Someone goes over to the spirit world and comes back with knowledge that helps someone or cures someone. This is more based on espionage kind of work, although I don't apply it in that direction. I apply it for solving real problems. Another long answer to a short question, but I think I covered. I don't know.
Oh yeah, I want to get deep into it. So what is your purpose for using remote viewing most commonly?
Most commonly, for the last number of years, this goes back in maybe 11 years, but intensively for maybe the last 5 or 6, is dealing with paranormally afflicted properties, houses with ghosts, entities, poltergeist phenomenon. And I would basically prepare myself for this, protect myself, prayers, protection, white light, armor, all that spiritual stuff. And I would go to the environment and I would look for what the problem is. And I would locate it. I would try to communicate with it, and I would deal with it by crossing it over or expelling it in some way. And I've now done this between 50 and 60 times, and it always works.
Wow.
It always works. And it works right away. I tend to do this work, and this is way outside of what I started to do, what I imagined I would. This is Doctor Strange kind of territory. If the paranormal phenomenon is constant, it stops the night I go at it. If it's intermittent, it never comes back. Okay, I'll tell you the story how I accidentally discovered I could do that, because it's interesting.
Yeah, I love to hear that.
About a dozen years ago or less, around this time of year, actually, this woman reached out to me on Facebook. She was a Facebook friend, and she knew me through my H.P. Lovecraft associations, but we didn't know each other. And she heard I was a psychic, and she had a problem. She and her husband and their 13-year-old daughter had moved into a new apartment building, and the daughter started complaining that she would see a strange man in her bedroom. And she would describe the man, and he had a weird kind of face, and human, but odd. Mm-hmm. Little guy, I guess, but kind of unpleasant demeanor. And they dismissed that as her imagination. And one morning she woke up, looked up, and there was the exact guy staring down at her.
Wow.
By the time she woke up her husband, he was gone. And he said, "You were dreaming." Then a few days or a week or so later, he saw the guy. And they had no place to turn. There was nobody left to say, "It's your imagination." They all saw him, and it was the same guy. Wow. So she said, could you read me on that? And I said, sure. The unfortunate part about the reading is I guess she never got readings before. She just dumped information into my head. She said the apartment building was built on the site of a house that burned down and a guy died in a fire. Was this the guy? Well, that's too much information. I want to read it from more of a blank canvas point of view. So there's no steering. She was steering me towards a possible solution. So I read it as best as I could, and I got a sense of fire and things. And I said, well, yeah, that looks like that might be what had happened. But, unfortunately, she kind of set it up so that I couldn't really use my abilities without being prejudiced. Wow. So for no reason I could say, I said, well, let me see if I can do something about this. And I don't know why I said that, but this happens a lot. I end up doing something I didn't know I could do. So I decided I would remote view the apartment that night, when everybody presumably was asleep. And so I did my remote viewing thing, preparation, and I popped into the environment. And very quickly I found this man-like form. I couldn't see him clearly. Mostly I can't when I'm doing this, when I'm on this level, and because the environment was dark. And I'm looking at him, and I'm figuring, well, maybe I can communicate with him. And I tried to do a kind of a mind probe. And all I could get was this angry animal kind of energy, like maybe mentally ill, maybe just filled with rage, maybe confusion. And I'm thinking, okay, what do I do in this instance? Because I did find the guy. And when I'm out of body and I'm doing this, sometimes I'll get guidance. And I heard a voice say, call in the angels or the archangels, I forget which. So mentally I asked for help. And this kind of portal opens up. 2 figures step out, grab the guy, pull him in, the portal closes. And I'm sort of floating there, standing there, whatever I'm doing, out of body. I'm thinking, what the hell? What was that about? So it was late at night. I went to sleep. I woke up the next day. I messaged her. I said, okay, I'm not sure what just happened here, but if what I think I experienced happened, he's gone. So keep me informed. So a week passes, no sign of him. A month passes, no sign of him. 6 months, no. A year, no sign of him. 2 years, no sign of him. And I said, why? Obviously, something happened because he stopped
Yeah.
showing. And I thought that was the end of it. But a friend of mine who's a medium started having poltergeist stuff at his place. No, that's not what happened. It's a better story. That happened later.
Okay.
A friend of mine who's a medium, very good medium, called me one day and he had a really weird problem. And this is probably a year or so later than the first experience. His weird problem is he'd go to bed at night and someone would crawl to bed with him. It was a female, but there was no one there, no one visible, but he could
Wow.
feel her, sense her, and it really would freak him out. He would just close his eyes and go to sleep and just pretend she's not there. This went on for a little while. And finally, he turned over in bed one night and said, okay, and try to communicate. Okay, who are you? She wouldn't give her name. Are you a dead person? Yes, I'm dead. Why are you here? I like being here. I like you. She's not attached to the house. She just wanders. There are wandering spirits, and sometimes they attach themselves to properties or people, temporarily, usually. And, you know, she basically gave him answers that said, well, I just like being here with you. And no other particular information that identified her and gave him any sense he could get rid of her. And I think he knew about my story. I'm not sure. Probably did. And I said, well, let me see if I could do anything about this. And the weird thing is, I remember the next morning calling him and saying, I think I got rid of her. And I remember him saying, yeah, she's gone, and she never came back, and she did never come back. Then I kind of forgot about it. And a year later, he brought it up just offhandedly. So, yeah, I did do that. What did I do? And I still to this day cannot remember what I did. I don't remember the experience, which is very strange because that would have been my second time doing this. And it should be memorable in some way.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know what I did, but she was gone. And so I've done like nearly 60 of them, or maybe 60 of them since then. They're not always ghosts. Sometimes they're really negative things, entities, creatures, whatever. And I just find ways to deal with them.
Wow. That's really interesting that you don't have much memory of the second time because I've had some interesting experiences. I don't know if I'll get into like details, but like I've had experiences where they're very vivid and very like real to me, but I've also had I feel like I've had other experiences that I didn't have as much of a conscious recollection of that. So I feel like when your consciousness is doing something, your mind isn't always necessarily aware of it to some extent. And also, like, you know, I feel like when you kind of slip into this like dream world or this non-physical astral
Dimension.
plane, it's kind of like it's sometimes hard to keep track of what you're actually doing in the mind.
Yeah, I think if you notice as a reader, just as a tarot reader or a medium, when you're deep in and you're doing it, you sometimes struggle with familiar words or even names. And I'm convinced that when you go into this state, some of your memories and some of your mental functioning is now sequestered. It's off. It's walled off, and you can't access it because you're operating on a different level, and that's more the human level, the earthly level. So if you see readers reading people like on YouTube, when they start to stumble over familiar names or words, you know they're really deep and you know they're really working, because they lose their articulation and they lose their connection with their full connection with their memories.
Wow.
And I think when you do some of this work, you know, in this case, remote viewing or out of body work, you can even have a very vivid experience that you don't remember. I know I may be wandering off the question a little bit, but I do notice this when I enter another property, which I always do with permission, you know, to clear a problem. I'm not seeing the physical reality the way it is. in remote viewing, sometimes I do see the physical reality more clearly, but in this ghost removal type of stuff, I have the impression of doors, windows, and furniture. I never see people or pets. And I've become convinced that what I'm doing is I'm operating on, let's say, the astral level that permeates the property, and not on the physical level where I could, where the furniture matters and the people matter. No, I'm looking for things on a different vibrational plane.
Yeah.
And so I'm only aware of the physical as constructs and structures, you know. Um, and obviously I'm not fully cognizant of everything in the environment because I'm looking for something on a vibrational level that I'm needing to get rid of. So I think that kind of goes to what we're talking about, that you may have different levels of consciousness and different levels of interacting with things. And some of these levels are kind of like what happens in dreams. You wake up and you half remember a dream, or you really remember the dream, but by the afternoon, what was that dream again? I can't remember it now. Where did it go? That kind of thing. So we're able to operate on different levels of focus, and some are higher and some are lower. If you stub your toe, you're going to remember it. But if you have an experience when you're out of body, it depends on the experience and depends on how important it is to you. You may not need to remember it. You just need to have had that experience.
Yeah. A big part of it is like just having faith and having trust that you're being guided, and like you'll get what you need. Like you know what you need to know. If you don't need to know it, then you might not know it. So
you have to be able to trust yourself and your intuition to a reasonable point, but it's a learning process, as I said before. You can't run around saying I'm psychic now, I can pick stock market numbers or lottery numbers. It doesn't necessarily work that way.
Yeah, for sure. So you give people psychic readings, you do the remote viewing, and you clear paranormal presences.
I'm also a medium.
So what do you do in that, or like what are the different like kinds of work that you do with that?
Well, I started training in mediumship at the top of 2000, which is when I started to earnestly train in remote viewing. So I kind of trained in them at the same time, and they affected one another in an interesting way, because I started using remote viewing techniques to do mediumship. And as you may know, most traditional mediums, they just open up and whoever comes through, comes through. Okay, that's the traditional way. That's a good way. There's nothing wrong with it. But because in remote viewing, we go after targets. We're not looking to just remote view any old thing. We're someone tells us, we're not going to tell you what the target is, but here are the coordinates. Go get it. Go there or find out what you can get about it. And so I had learned to, because I don't like that open-ended stuff. I'm more focused in terms of mediumship. I learned to say to the client, give me the full name of the person, give me their birthday or their astrological sign, or if you don't have that, their hair color. Don't tell me anything else. Don't give me the year. Don't give me relationship. I don't want to hear it's your mother. I just want I want to get that person if I can. And the caveat I always say, there may be someone else who wants to come in too. They may come in first. We're gonna listen to them. I'll pass on the message. We'll politely dismiss them, and then we'll focus on the person you want to. Because if you've ever had this experience, people have come out of mediumship sessions saying, well, my grandmother came through, but not the one I was close to. Well, what's with that? And it's like, well, mediums will say, I just connect with the people I connect with. That's not me. I'll connect with the person you want to connect with, because my other training and the way my mind works, makes me do that. And I shouldn't say makes me. It's my preferred way to do it, because it gets us right into it fast. And so when I do that, I often see how the person died first, and then I move into communication. Wow. And I like to push the envelope, because once I get confident that there's There's good communication. I'm going to say to the client, ask her any question you want, but make sure you address her. Don't address me, because you'll engage my rational mind. And usually I'll get a coherent answer that I wouldn't know the answer to, but that the deceased person would, and the living client would. And so I do it on that level, which is very different than most people, but I won't say that I'm the only one doing it. Obviously not. There's got to be other people who approach it that way.
Yeah. It seems like you have a very specific kind of like special training for like what you practice, which is
I want to say this just as an interesting point. I found remote viewing very easy to learn. I found mediumship very hard. Mediumship requires you to be on a level of vibration. I wasn't there yet when I started training, but my teachers were patient with me. They saw I had potential. Because I was a professional psychic, there was a problem. And the problem was that some of the information you can get as a medium, a psychic can get just by being psychic. It's not communication, it's just being psychic. And I think there are some mediums out there who aren't really so much mediums as really good psychics who don't know they're not mediums because they're not doing communication. They're sort of downloading information about the deceased person, and it's accurate information or mostly accurate information. And so, well, I'm a medium because I got this information. No, communication is the bottom line here. If you're not communicating. So I trained for, I think, 2 years, and I wasn't really getting anywhere. And I'll tell you this funny story. We started, the class was seasonal, fall to the end of spring. The class started up in the fall one year, and we had a new instructor, a co-instructor, and she said, we're going to do things differently. The old way was the circle approach. I hated the circle approach because everybody was talking. I couldn't filter out the noise and get a signal from anybody. Sometimes, but not often. So the instructor said, we're going to change how we're going to do this. We're going to have you come up one at a time to the platform and do a reading for the group. In other words, get someone for the group. Well, everybody except me was petrified because that's not how the pressure. It was performance. They never had to do that. To me, it was like, hey, I'll volunteer. It's like that's remote viewing in a sense. It was like remote viewing. The pressure is, but it's also like doing psychic readings or things like that. So I jumped up the platform. It was a small group of people. I knew them enough to know them, but I didn't know them personally. And I closed my eyes and I opened up. And the first thing I saw was a carrot in my head. Thinking, why am I seeing a carrot? And the trick in mediumship is if you see something you don't understand, just stay with it. It will show itself. It will reveal itself. And I got carrot top, carrot head, someone with red hair. Then I saw the word young, white letters against a black background. I didn't notice the Y was capitalized. And I said, okay, I'm getting someone who, when they were alive, was, and I saw a heart attack kind of energy. I said, I'm getting someone who, when they were alive, were known as carrot top or something like that. It's an old-fashioned word for a redhead. And I don't know if he died young or his last name was Young, but I'm seeing the word young, and he died of a heart attack. And one other woman said, that's my husband. He died young, and his last name was Young.
Wow.
And he had red hair, and he died of a heart attack. And the last name wasn't her present last name. She went back to her married name, her maiden name. So I didn't know that last name in connection with this person. So boom, boom, boom. And so and I got some more information. I don't remember it, but that was the part. So that was the turning point for me to become a medium. If you think about it, that's a little bit like remote viewing too. It's like it starts with just images and you just work with them.
Yeah.
And that's how I went from being the class dunce in the remote viewing class to someone who was coming into his own.
That's awesome. Imagine
yeah, thank you.
Sorry.
It was a mediumship class. Yeah, sorry. I said remote viewing class. It's a mediumship class.
Oh, okay, yeah. So it's really amazing, like, just given that like different opportunity of like a different style of experiencing that and learning it, like that really amplified it for you.
Well, psychics are like artists or writers or singers. Everybody, even if you're a singer doing a cover for a song, or a painter emulating Rembrandt or Picasso, whoever, you're still going to be an individual within that imitation, and you're going to bring your own flavor to it, your own personality to it. So as a consequence, you will learn by imitation, but you also grow into being who you are or who you should be in the psychic world. Psychics are individualistic, just because it's a creative process in some ways. I think the human imagination is much more complex than we think it is. We use it for daydreaming, but also for dreaming. We use it to imagine, doing something and going somewhere. We use it to imagine our vacation, and also we use it to make money, and whatever. But I think it's also a gateway to psychic ability.
Yeah, I think so
Because
too.
if you think about it, uh, when I imagine something when I use my imagination as a medium, I'm just opening a window and saying, okay, show me what I need to see. I could be, hello, kitty cat, how are you? I closed my door so my cat can't jump on the chair while I'm here. So, I think the difference between using imagination as a psychic or a medium and using it as a creative person is you open the window of imagination, but you don't try to create anything in it. You let something happen in that window, and then you visualize it and report it or work with it.
I recently have become more aware of this, and I've started like actually trying to stretch my imagination as a practice, as like kind of like a workout to develop like any like intuition or any psychic abilities that I might, be needing or wanting to develop. I find it like really helpful, at least to like, kind of be more conscious in my experiences. Like I was talking about, like in dreams and experiences that I've had that I don't really like remember. I'm kind of like trying to stretch my imagination in order to like have more conscious recollection or like ability to like, be more present in my experiences, my spiritual experiences.
I think I've become convinced in retrospect, because I did so much writing and so much creative work over so many years, that my psychic ability, more or less, maybe not completely, but somewhat, was activated by that constant process of doing creative work day after day after day. I could be wrong about it. Maybe it was just the right time for it to happen, and karmically or whatever. But I think if you do creative stuff, I think that will churn your imagination and in a way that may activate or improve your intuition.
Yeah, I think you're so right, and it's so cool that you actually mentioned that now, and now I'm realizing like I think that my spiritual awakening, it just started like I would say like 2020, but like before that I definitely had like a kickstart, and that was when I started creatively writing.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm just like kind of realizing now that like that probably gave me like a huge opening up to just like an activation almost.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And I think there are many ways that can happen. Some psychics I've worked with, they were activated by trauma. You know, some people are activated by creative stuff. Some people are activated by maybe something that isn't traumatic but is life altering, like a death in the family, or the failure of a marriage, or a failure of a relationship, and they're kind of left in a kind of empty place, and they start looking for new moorings, new directions. And this is one of the things that may come because you've turned off the noise of your ordinary life, or it's been turned off for you, and you're looking around. What else is out there? Where's the meaning here? I just spent 10 years in a relationship or a marriage, and I thought it was perfect, and it's over with now. I'm looking for meaning. I'm looking for direction, and that's how some people find their way in this direction.
Yeah. I think of it a lot, or I relate it a lot to like this like rock bottom moment too sometimes, and a lot like experiencing like the recovery process for like alcoholics and addicts, like they like part of the steps is like going through a spiritual awakening.
Ah, really?
Because
Okay.
that's like, you kind of end up in a place where everything has to change and you have to start looking in like a different in different places for your fulfillment rather than
Yeah.
like the bottom of a bottle, for
Right,
example.
right, right. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. There are many paths, but they kind of take you in the same overpath, shall we say,
Yeah.
a higher path.
Yeah. Do you feel like there's like a massive spiritual awakening happening at this time?
That's hard for me to say because, on one hand, I'm a little isolated because I'm very intensely writing. And since COVID, I don't go out as much as I used to. I don't go to movies the way I used to. I don't socialize as much as I used to, even though the COVID thing has died down. I've just gotten into a new groove. I follow a lot of people on YouTube who are readers, who are reading the world scene and the political scene because since the last few years, the last few presidential elections, there's been a lot of uncertainty and concern about what's going on, where is it heading. And certainly they do well and they have an audience and it's interesting to see their accuracy. But I don't know that I would agree with it in the sense that you say it. I would maybe say some people are getting more and some people seem to be getting less, and there's like a
There's like a split,
fissure
right?
going. Yeah, there's a split. So I'm not in the psychic world where I work at a place anymore. I do still have friends from that world, but I'm not at the center of it anymore, and I'm not socializing in that arena as much as I used to, except with close friends, long-term friends. So I'm a little out of touch with the the
The collective.
the gestalt, shall we say, except the sense that there are always people who are going to enter into this, and there are always people who are going to shy away from it. And there seems to be more of a schism in society that I see now than maybe there used to be. Although I think it was always there, it's just now coming to the surface in a strong.
Yeah.
So if it's happening, it's not happening universally.
Okay. I wanted to ask something else too. Like, so you, like, in your mediumship, does that, like, would you be able to, like, talk to, like, higher spirits? Like, could you, like, speak with someone's higher self or, like, find out about someone's past lives or something?
I've done a little of that. I know people who do it much better than I would ever imagine. I tend to read more practical. I will connect with my own guides and I can try to connect with people's guides. Normally, in my clientele over the years, most people ask pretty earthly questions. But once in a while, I will get someone who wants to connect with someone higher. And I've had some interesting experiences there. The problem for me with those is there really isn't feedback that will tell you if you're on the signal, so to speak. I remember a very interesting experience I had. A young woman came to me, and she wanted to connect with Anne Boleyn, the woman who was beheaded in Great Britain back in the King Henry, I guess it was Henry's days.
Wow.
Entered into that state, and I tried to make a connection, and I saw a woman's breast in old-fashioned clothes, and she had her hand over her breast, and part of that was the Sacred Heart of Jesus, the symbol of the Sacred Heart of Jesus. And she showed me bare feet and cold flagstone floors, and how she was getting arthritis from being barefoot on cold floors.
Wow.
And things that were personal to Anne Boleyn. And then I said, okay, ask your question. She asked her question. I got answers. The answers made sense to her. We closed down the reading. And when I did a little research on Anne Boleyn, the thing she did before she was beheaded was she commended her heart, her soul to the Sacred Heart of Jesus, and that was the symbol I saw, even though I didn't recognize what that was when I saw it.
Wow.
I said, I guess I did that. Okay,
Wow.
but you can do things, but I I think you have to respect the people who passed on, and you just can't call up Abraham Lincoln and say, "Hey, what do you think of what's going on now?" People do it. I
Mm.
don't. That's why I don't like doing celebrity readings. I don't read what on celebrities. Some people do. I think celebrities are entitled to privacy like everybody
Yeah.
else, even though they're in the public arena. So there are things that I'm sensitive to about. Just because I can do it doesn't mean I should. And as far as past lives are concerned, um, you know, a person can say that feels right, that feels interesting, but it's not the same as, yeah, I kind of remember that. It's like I like the feedback that says, I think your reading was accurate, because I don't want to be going off in my imagination in some direction that, like, if someone said I'm related to Abraham Lincoln, I want to talk to him. Well, even there, it's like, because I know about Abraham Lincoln, how much of this is my imagination as opposed to my psychic imagination,
Right.
you know?
Yeah, it's
You
hard
want
to.
to do an honest reading no matter what the challenge is, which means sometimes you have to say no.
Yeah. Um. So, oh, do you? I mean, Timmy was just here. That's my cat. Do you connect with animals at all?
I have cats.
Yeah.
I've had cats for most of my adult life, but I don't connect with them on necessarily the level I do this. I wish I could. I don't really feel like I'm communicating with my cats in a psychic way. I communicate with them in the way that we communicate, and we're close. We relate to one another. But no, I'm not. I'm not an animal communicator.
Okay.
You
Yeah.
know.
Sometimes I feel like if I get into like a certain state, I feel like I can like tap in a little bit to like a little bit more clearer understanding of what he wants in a
Yeah,
given moment or something.
yeah. I wish I could do that, but maybe I may not have to be patient enough to do it because I always, when I'm doing something for myself, the fear I have is how much of this is my imagination or my desire, or in some cases, my rejection of bad news. Oh, I don't want to know that cat has cancer or
Yeah.
something like that, or has a kidney problem. So, I always say you can read for yourself, but you really should be very careful about that because it's the key to being a good psychic reader isn't just psychic ability, it's objectivity. The ability to look at things clearly and without either steering it from the client or steering it by your own desire to give good news, if at all possible, to give good news.
Yeah.
Not all news is good.
Right. So when you do a reading for someone, you usually do like a phone reading, and do you use cards when
Yeah,
you? Yeah.
I'll use cards. Sometimes I may go off the cards, but I tend to. The cards are helpful because I don't read them mechanically, so they really trigger my intuition, and I can go off them. But the advantage of cards is because they're physical and because they're right there, and you can quickly shuffle and quickly pull cards. You get right into the reading. Whereas if I just sat back, closed my eyes, sometimes it could be a slow start. And that, it's like dead air on radio. You don't want dead air. If someone wants a 15-minute reading, all those 15 minutes should count.
Yeah.
That's why cards are useful to me. And that's how I broke in. But I'm beyond cards now, but I think I rely on them for certain kinds of readings.
So, do you have any tips for like beginners who want to like start playing with cards and like, you know, uh, developing their intuition?
Well, I think most tarot readers started on the kitchen table, being taught by their mother, the grandmother, or someone, and reading family and friends, and that's how you develop your skills by test readings. You read someone and the problem with reading someone is you know them, and so there's a little bit of an issue there. But once you develop trust in reading people and they give you the feedback, you were right about this, you were right about that, then you can progress to reading strangers, which is where it gets really interesting, because when you're reading strangers, you don't have any preconceptions. You have to be purely psychic to read them accurately.
Yeah.
A because I read without learning cards. I'll say it this way. There's three kinds of readers that I can see that read cards. Mechanical, they learn the meanings, they learn the spreads, they learn the juxtapositions of the cards, and they can be very accurate provided the client pulls accurate cards.
Mm-hmm.
Then there's mechanical intuitive, someone who knows the cards, can read them, has a good grasp of it, but also has an intuition that comes into play that takes them above the level of reading cards. Mm-hmm. And then there's the purely psychic reader who doesn't necessarily need the cards, but the cards are helpful. They trigger things. And I would say if it's possible to read on the psychic level, that's probably best. But the truth is, the more you know, the better you are. Mm-hmm. Mechanical readers can get stuck in mechanical readings, and they can be accurate, like I say, but they can be very blocky, and they can be kind of, see Dick run and see Spot run and all that stuff. Mm-hmm. It's simplistic, it's accurate. An intuitive reader or a psychic reader can get lost in the weeds, but they can get higher information, and that's valuable. Yeah. So I'd say don't overlearn the cards. Mm-hmm. Try to use the cards in a more flexible way, and try to prepare yourself mentally before you read the cards. Clear your mind, go into a relaxed state, do breathing exercises, always do a prayer of protection and guidance, and try to read it on a level where you're not being mechanical. You're not reading cards like they're words. Mm-hmm. You're reading them like they're images that are triggering intuitive insights. But everybody has to start where they start, and everybody has their strengths and weaknesses, and everybody can get stronger over time. So I'd say find the way that works for you. I'd say the same thing about writing. Find the way to get the first draft that works for you, whether it's longhand on yellow sheets of paper or on a computer where you can change anything at any time. Find something that fits your brain, your personality. Yeah. Earlier you asked about developing trust in your intuition. A technique I've come to use, which is an advanced technique, but anybody could use it. When you're falling asleep, you're getting into that kind of intuitive zone. And when you're waking up in the morning, you're waking from that intuitive zone. Mm-hmm. Either going to bed at night when you're really relaxed, when you're really quiet, or waking up before you're fully awake and maybe before you open your eyes. If you ask your guides, what kind of day am I going to have? Listen to the answer and see what the day turns out to be based on the answer. And if you do that enough times and you get accurate foreshadowing of your day, that's a good start, not only in your day, but on trusting what you get. Because that's opening up a conduit between yourself, your higher self, or your guides, or all of those.
Yeah. Love it. Would you want to demonstrate any kind of reading right now, or you say you do kind of conscious remote viewing? I don't know if you could do a thing like that, but if you
I have done this on radio. I don't know. I wasn't prepared for it. Let me think about what we could do that would be simple. Again, dead air and the pressure of not, you have to be quiet for me to do what I do, and who wants to watch 10 minutes of me getting mentally prepared? That's boring.
Okay.
But let me think about that. If there's something we could do, let me take a few deep breaths. Now I know your first name is Kim. What is your birthday? Not the year, but just the birthday.
It's December 21st.
December 21st. So you're a Capricorn. Mm-hmm. Okay. Let me see if I can connect with you and get just something, anything that, might be useful or might be, we can validate. Sometimes I go in a direction that's safe, okay? Mm-hmm. And when I mean safe is sometimes when I was first a psychic, I would blurt out whatever I got because I was trying to prove myself, and sometimes I would spell out things that people didn't want to hear. And I somehow started to become sensitive to the foods people ate, whether their likes, their dislikes, or whatever. And as jokingly they'd call me the food psychic, but I would never do that in a professional reading, I would just do that, when I was reading other readers or for fun, because it was something they could validate that they wouldn't be embarrassed about or wouldn't want to be, heard in a group. So let me see, because I'm just saying in case I start seeing food around you, because I started seeing eggs before I started speaking on it. That's why I started on the food things. I saw some, fried eggs, 2 fried eggs merged together. And don't comment on that, because I'm just trying to see if we see anything that is something you can say I relate to that. So I'm seeing sausages and fried eggs. And then I'm seeing a ring, and the ring is very slim and it's gold, and it makes me think of an engagement ring or a wedding ring, and I'm going to say that's probably what it is, because I don't know what else it would be, because it has that look.
Wow.
Now I'm seeing playing cards. Do you ever try reading with playing cards?
Yes.
You do? Okay.
Yeah.
Because not too many people do, but that's actually a very good way to read. Never putting aside the eggs and the sausages and the rings. I'm seeing playing cards, and I'm obviously not seeing them in the context of you playing poker or whist or something like that. Is that something that you're doing now? You're starting to do?
I don't do it often, but I have a couple of decks that I pull out once in a while.
Okay. And why are you using cards when I think you tend to use tarot?
Well, I just have a couple of cool ones that I like. There's one that's
So it's experimentation.
yeah.
Okay. Let me see if I see it. Since they came up, let me see if I see anything about that. Seeing the Ace of Clubs and the Ace of Spades, 2 black cards. I don't know what that means in playing cards in terms of reading, because I don't read playing cards. Do you know what they mean?
Ace of Clubs and Ace of Spades. I think that would be Ace of Pentacles and Ace of...
Yeah, in tarot, yeah. In tarot, well, I'm not sure the equivalence is, but I think spades might be swords, and clubs might be pentacles, discs, if I'm not mistaken. Does that mean anything to you?
I'm not sure. I know aces as like a gift from the universe. That's what I usually take it.
Well, aces tend to be positive. Aces tend to be supportive, like you're on the right path, or the door is about to open. But I'm seeing those 2 cards around the issue of reading playing cards, or around playing cards around you. Let me see if I see anything else. I'm seeing a desk drawer, and do you keep one of these decks in a desk drawer that's like in the back?
I have an altar, and it has drawers, and yeah. So
okay, because I'm seeing this drawer, and there's some jewelry kinds of things, or some randomly kinds of things, but there's a deck in the back of you have to like reach into it or pull it all the way out to see the deck. And I'm not even sure what kind of a deck it is, but it might be tarot, it might be playing cards. So I'm seeing that. Hold on. I'm seeing candles now. I would say that goes to the altar. I know you have a candle on your desk. I'm seeing 2 candles, and they're uneven heights. The left candle is taller than the right candle from when you face it. Is that correct?
So the drawer that has that deck of cards, it has a bunch of different candles in there, like spell candles and stick candles.
Okay, but in terms of the candles on the altar, I assume you have candles on the altar, or you put them on the altar sometimes. Am I right?
Yeah, sometimes.
Okay. Recently, or does it, or ritualistically, would there be 1 short candle and 1 tall candle? This would be right when you face it. This would be left when you face it. Does that mean anything to you?
I'm not sure if that could be maybe talking about something else, because whenever I burn a candle, it's usually just like a tea light.
Tea light. Yeah, no, these are stick candles. And 1 is short and fat, and I think it's meant to be short and fat as opposed to a candle that's burnt down, and the other is tall and slim. Okay. I'm wondering if this is suggesting that you set up candles that are like that, which I would caution you to be very careful about because of fire and all that stuff. But I'm seeing, uneven. It might not be going to your altar. It might be going to something else you'll see.
Okay.
But it's a very distinctive image in that this is a short, fat, squat candle, and this is a tall, slim, elegant candle, and they're in candlestick holders of some kind. And so they're a little more formal in their presentation than a tea light. So I'm definitely not seeing a tea light. See if I get anything else. Did you have a dog when you were young?
I did.
Small dog, kind of cocker spaniel-y or poodle-y, or little hairy dog is what I'm seeing.
Kind of. So when I had like a mixed dog, she was like a beagle mix.
Okay, but yes, because I'm seeing small dog, but I'm seeing kind of hairy, like a cocker spaniel. Beagle is not hairy in the way I'm seeing.
So my aunt had a dog named Lacey. She was a Shih Tzu, and she was really mean.
That's a short hair. I don't know why I would be seeing your aunt's dog when I'm focusing on you.
She bit me when I was a kid.
Okay, well, was that traumatic?
Probably.
Okay. Well, I mean, we pick up weird things. I don't like to drag things in that just happen to fit and say, okay, I was seeing your aunt's dog, but if dog bit you and you were young enough, that could leave a mark on your personality in sense of it was an early experience that stayed with you. I don't know why that's coming up, but this is the problem with an open reading. You just get sometimes a blizzard of things, and they're not coherent, which is why I don't like to do them, because they may be impressive in terms of wow, that's interesting that you saw that, but it's more entertainment than it's a practical reading, because a practical reading should empower you and give you something to take home to ponder and think about and apply. When I saw the 2 fried eggs and the sausages next to them, did that mean anything to you?
I don't know about the sausages, but last night I cooked dinner for myself, and I took out 2 eggs, but I only cooked one of them, and then I put the other one back in the fridge. So I don't know if that was.
Yeah, I saw 2. Okay, so you do eat eggs. Okay, which is not uncommon, but it's the first thing I saw, and it's a safe thing to see, as opposed to something that might be more personal or something. Let me see if I can't. I think I'm reading you. Let me try to focus on something that may be a little more. Well, if you ask a question.
I was going to say, would it help if I asked something specific?
It would definitely help if you ask a question.
I would really love if you could, if I could, have some kind of, what does my higher self, want me to know right now? Or want me to focus on?
The first thing I'm seeing is a pair of large hands pushing downward as if to say, calm your energy, center your energy. Almost like don't expand too fast or don't reach too high. I think this is spiritually and not in your regular active life. I think this is kind of, and you seem like a calm person and you're a Capricorn, but it's like, slow down, pace yourself. If you were climbing a spiritual ladder, in life, it's like don't race up the ladder. Take the rungs one group at a time. Keep your balance. Keep centered. It's and again, you can tell me how this applies, if it applies in terms of your understanding. But it feels like slow down, pace yourself, don't rise too high too fast. Okay. And I want to read that as your spiritual development or exploration, and not anything practical like career objectives or something like that. Do you relate to that?
Yeah.
Okay.
Definitely.
Now the same hands are pulling. They're on either side of your ears and pulling, and I think this is. I don't know that the ears are important, but it's like expand your awareness in terms of this dimension and not that dimension, which might be either practical stuff In other words, as a reader, read more practically. Or it could mean, be more aware of the things around you on all levels and not so much looking up. Okay, because that does relate to the pushing down feeling that you've just acknowledged. And it just feels like if I could sort of give you a metaphor of what I'm seeing, it's like if you have vision that's like tunnel vision, it's like, no, expand, use your peripheral vision just as much as your forward vision. It's kind of like this could go to situational awareness, just walking down the street, being safe, but it also could be in terms of your psychic work, is to expand this way, to sort of to be able to see a wider picture than maybe the picture that you might get looking up. So these two things make me think grounding and staying practical and staying focused on earthly things while you do this, or as you do this, or on top of doing this, in addition to doing this spiritual work, is important to you.
Yeah. That definitely resonates a lot.
And now I'm seeing something that's like a twirling motion that makes me feel about balance issues that could be practical in terms of vertigo issues or dizziness issues, but it also could be keep your balance. Just your balance, life, work balance, life, practical life, spiritual life balance, whatever. But this motion here makes me feel that you can be prone to imbalances in your life. And that it's important that with the other two things to be centered, grounded, no matter what you're exploring and how you're exploring.
Yeah.
The image I'm seeing in my head is, if you're going to go into space, go to the moon, don't go to Mars, don't go too far too fast. Explore one before you explore the other. That makes me think, just indirectly think that you may be wanting or trying to explore higher and higher realms or higher and higher concepts when you haven't quite established as balanced a foundation as you need to before you do that stuff. Do you relate to that?
Yeah. In fact, I was talking about foundations with a friend last night. That, I don't know if I should go into it, but
Well, it's up to you. It's your personal stuff. But the point is that I think I'm connecting to the guidance you're asking me to connect to.
Yeah.
And you'll see I did that fairly quickly once we did the preliminary stuff.
Yeah.
And it feels like there's a strong awareness from your guidance of where you are, what you're trying to do, and what you need to be doing in addition to or before some of the things you're trying to do, or I want to use the word explorations. The image I'm being shown now is that you're in an elevator that might go up 100 floors. You should go up 20 floors, or maybe 10 floors before you go up to 100 floors, because the lower floors still have, and I guess we're talking about spiritual or experiential floors. The lower floors need to be explored before you explore the higher floors. And it feels like in order to handle the higher floors, you need to have your grounding in the lower floors. So if you get, and this is not a warning, but this is just a suggestion, that if you get up too high, your refuge is to go back down to a familiar lower floor and pull yourself together before you go back up to a higher floor. Yeah. It's a big caution not to ascend in your knowledge path too quickly and not to be impatient. That so that you can handle each floor as you reach it with confidence and a sense of being able to navigate the floors we're talking about, the higher floors.
Yeah. I like that. It definitely resonates. Because, I guess I feel like, sometimes I feel like I wish I kind of, got into this stuff earlier or learned things earlier or, got started on my path sooner. And so now, it's, making up for lost time. So maybe I am a little bit, rushed Or
Yeah, I
right.
relate to that because I
Yeah.
came to it late in life too. However, it's things have to be done in the right order. If you're going to build a house, you have to build a foundation. If you're going to build the second floor, you have to build the first floor.
Mm-hmm.
All these things, and you can't put a roof on until you have the whole house
Yeah.
squared away, and the roof is the last part or the
Mm.
last significant part of the structure. So you need to be measured and paced, and you need to not skip steps or rush up that elevator. Just because the view is better from the 100th floor, it doesn't mean the 10th floor isn't where you belong when at this point, and
Mm.
you may need to stay on lower floors for longer than you want to. It's all about um, it's all about assembling solid lower floors so that higher floors can be safely occupied or explored.
Mm-hmm.
Seeing a curtain close, I think your guide is, and I see this in mediumship. I usually don't see it on this level. Curtain and closing is saying the guide has spoken his piece and
Mm.
has concluded what he wants to communicate to you.
Wow.
And I think that was, you say that's accurate. It feels accurate to me because I don't know you, well enough to have an inkling of this. So it's interesting that he used hand gestures because sometimes they're verbal and sometimes they
Mm.
show pictures, but this was hand gestures and then images.
Wow. That
So,
was so cool. Thank
well,
you for that.
you're welcome. I didn't think I could do that, on short notice, but
Mm,
you
yeah,
know, it did.
it worked out. And it's funny that you mentioned a deck of cards because whenever I do a podcast, I like to offer my guests a reading at the end, and I actually pulled this deck of cards out of my altered drawer.
Uh-huh.
It's not the ace of whatever on top, but it's like, so
Right.
it's like this like Chinese
Oh,
art,
right. Oh, yeah, and
really
that's playing
pretty.
cards. Yeah, playing cards with
Yeah,
images.
yeah. So I was gonna try it because I didn't really have any other like, my other decks are like oracle decks or like funky tarot decks. So I thought this one would be more like fun, and I could like do something intuitive for you if you want to
Sure.
do a reading after.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Cool.
Um, do you have more questions?
For oh yes, I do. I do.
Okay.
I thought you were asking for the spirit guide, but yeah.
No.
I have a couple of questions that I ask all my guests. So, my first one is, what are you here on Earth right now for? Not to do, just what are you here to experience or learn?
It's a good question. I think I'm here to explore creativity in multiple directions, but I might also be here to be, obviously, to be in certain people's lives at certain times, to be, of support to them or help to them, or just to share. I mean, because we do talk about past lives and karmic connections and things like that. And um, I think when we come down to the nitty gritty of it, is I'm exploring creativity in a broader sense than maybe a lot of writers because of the psychic stuff, but also because of the varied types of creative work I do.
Mm-hmm.
The fact that I'm not just one kind of writer or even one kind of psychic. So I think to experience creativity and spirituality in multiple modalities is
Mm,
probably what my life is about,
love that.
because that's what's.
Yeah. Um, what can we expect to see from you in the golden future of humanity? What is your role in our transition to higher consciousness, if you believe that is
Well,
happening?
I don't see myself as having any great role. As a writer, I tend to either entertain or inform. As a psychic, I guide and instruct and whatever. I miss teaching psychic abilities, but I don't have the venue for it right now.
Mm,
My role, my role is probably like a lighthouse in the sense that if you want to be a writer, looking at the things I do and how I do that can tell you, can help you skip some steps. As a psychic, as a medium, just as I did with you a minute ago, my role would be to help you to find your way forward, make good decisions, but to go forward in a way that fits how you need to go forward in order to develop at the pace you need to develop at, you know. I mean, I did 2 years of mediumship training before I got any good at it. I didn't give up, but I sure was frustrated. You know, I just felt like, I mean, I need to do this, but I'm not getting what I want out of it. But that's my answer.
Awesome. What is your highest and brightest vision of the future without worrying how to get there?
My future or a larger future? Not sure.
Both, or whichever one comes to mind first.
Well, I mean, I'm 71, so I don't have a big horizon here. So my brightest future is just to keep writing books while I can, and to be in somewhat comfortable in life that I'm living, and to be with the people I'm with. As far as the world is concerned, there's a lot of talk about 4D, 5D transitions that I don't completely understand. But one of my teachers was talking about it 20 years ago, and so it's kind of new in the things I'm hearing in the now. But to me, it's like I've been hearing about this for 20 something years. So I would like to think that we're evolving and we're expanding, but often we do so after or during destruction and trauma and things that are bad that cause us to look at things in new ways. So the bright future may be on the other side of dark clouds, and I don't like to think about that. I don't care for dark clouds or destruction or Armageddon or some of the things people talk about. But that's what happens.
Yeah.
My instructor in remote viewing, this is now 25 years ago, was talking about the four turnings. How civilizations have a building phase, an established phase, an unraveling phase, and a catastrophic phase. And 25 years ago, he says we're in the unraveling phase. And looking at the world, especially this month, with what's going on in the last few years, we are certainly unraveling. And if there's a catastrophic phase ahead of us, it could be pretty bad. And, at this point, I'd like to have a few peaceful years left in my life without having to deal with catastrophes.
Yeah.
But it is what it is, and it'll be what it will be.
Yeah. That's true. Were there any other questions that I didn't ask you that you wish I'd ask? And what are they? And feel free to answer them now.
Oh, I have plenty of anecdotes about doing this work that are very interesting. But I don't, some of them are a little long. And I think it's important to understand that psychic readings and psychic work done correctly is supposed to be empowering. It's supposed to give people information or knowledge that is helpful to them and helpful to the people around them, as opposed to once in a while someone wants to know what their ex is doing when maybe that's okay a month or two after they broke up, but maybe a year or two after they broke up is not so okay. And knowing boundaries. I guess when I was teaching psychic reading, I would always teach an ethics, section. Things, do's and don'ts, things to be aware of, things to, because when I started, even though I was a mature man when I started, I didn't know that world. And so I thought it was just about being psychic. It's really about being a helpful guide to people, to empower them. That, it isn't always about accuracy. Because sometimes if you put information in someone's hands, it changes what they were going to do, and the outcome becomes different. The analog I used to use was if 3 people came and said, "I'm going to run the Boston Marathon if I keep training. How am I going to do it?" And in person 1 says, "Okay," the psychic says, "I'm gonna finish the Boston Marathon. Maybe I don't need to train so hard." And maybe they don't finish the Boston Marathon because they thought it was in the bag. I wasn't predicting, what was going to happen. I was following the energy of what happens. And so I don't need to put the effort in. I'll skip the marathon. I was going to win. putting information in people's hands changes how they approach the problem, sometimes better, sometimes worse. Mm-hmm. So you always have to stress to people that, the future isn't fixed yet, even though we sometimes see it very clearly. Mm-hmm. And it's very, the problem of precognition is something I think about a lot. Mm-hmm. And I have a story about that if we have the time I can tell. And because I think it's instructive for us to think of you as a reader, me as a reader, but also ordinary people to think about the dichotomy between predestination, if it exists, and free will, if it exists. When I was first training as a medium, in one of the early classes at the beginning of the teaching season in the fall, the small class, we paired off and we would read each other, try to bring someone through. Mm. And I was paired off with the instructor, which of course makes you a little nervous, And my problem, as I mentioned before, is as a psychic, there's information I can get that seems mediumistic, but isn't, because it's not communication. Mm-hmm. So I sat down with her and I closed my eyes and I went into my space and I saw a little movie in my head. And in the movie, she's driving her car on what looked like Route 1 in, north of Boston. And I knew she worked on the North Shore, so I already knew that. And it's late at night, so she's coming home from work. And I could tell from the environment that it was winter, but there was no snow on the ground. And she's driving along. And all of a sudden, the car in front of her brakes suddenly, and she rear ends it. And, she's not injured particularly. The airbag doesn't go off, but it's a significant collision. Mm-hmm. And the problem with being a psychic is when you look at things, sometimes you see the more dramatic things because they're the loudest signal, whether it's a death, illness, birth, accident, something traumatic, something dramatic, something emotional. A car accident is all those things. It's kinetic and it's emotional. Mm-hmm. It's a sudden, sharp thing that happens that's unexpected. And it always stops people, from their normal thought patterns. Anyway, so reluctantly I had to tell her, I'm seeing you driving home from work, North Shore. It feels like the winter. There's no snow, and you don't brake in time. And I think I told her the color of the car in front. Mm. And I said, that's not a mediumship reading. That's what I saw. Okay. Mm-hmm. So I gave her the message, and flash forward to nearly Christmas that year, and I show up for class, and I'm the only one there with the teacher. And she says, well, I guess we won't have a class, but we can read each other. Mm-hmm. So I read her, and I got the same movie. And it was really embarrassing because it's not mediumship, Mm-hmm. And I said, I'm seeing the same thing, but I'm seeing something different. You're not paying attention to your driving. Your mind is elsewhere. My feeling, and I said this before, my feeling is this can be avoided if you pay attention. Okay? So I left her with that. And again, it was embarrassing because that's a psychic reading, not a mediumship reading. Well, we flash forward to March of that year, and she comes in wearing a neck brace, and she won't make eye contact with me. And during a break in the class, I said, okay, something happened. What happened? And she didn't want to really talk about it, but she had been driving on Route 1, coming home from work. It was cold. There was no snow. And the car in front of her, a green car, which is what I saw, brake. But she paid attention because I'd warned her. Mm. She braked in time, but the car behind her hit her and drove her into the green car. Her airbag did not deploy. But the interesting thing, and I missed this point when I said it to you, she used to give me rides home from the church after the class. Mm. So I'm used to sitting in the passenger seat, and that was my point of view in the two visions. In my point of view, after the accident, there was like about an inch of crumple at the hood of her car in the front. So at the end of the class, I go out to her car to get the ride home, and I get behind and get in the passenger seat, and I'm looking at the crumple, and it's an inch, give or take. And it's not the exact same crumple because I couldn't remember it with all those details, but it was exactly the damage I saw before. and her airbag didn't deploy, but she did avoid insurance liability because she did brake in time. So I saw it before it happened. I gave her information. It changed the outcome without changing the outcome.
Yeah.
So what did I see? How did I see it? Why is that there? I know how, as a psychic, you can see things before they happen on certain levels. But that's an accident, in a specific green car, in a specific time of day, in a specific road. Why was that information available to me? Where did it come from? What is that about? So we get into, there must be something about predestination that's real, just as is free will, which is why I refuse to subscribe to either one. It's both.
Yeah.
They're both there. And I've had a lot of precognitive experiences, but that's one that shows you can change the future, but maybe not all the way. Maybe the accident was supposed to happen.
Yeah. I think that, I agree. And it makes me think that, like, there are things that we do pre-plan, like certain moments or certain instances, and like that accident had to happen in some way. Maybe it was like a certain moment in her life that she needed to experience, that her soul wanted to grow from. But you were able to give her some guidance on that. Like, obviously, like, spirit wanted to help give her a little bit of guidance, at least, like, she could help, not like suffer from it with the insurance or whatever. But it was probably like, there's just different levels on, like, what we're
seeing it twice was really weird, because I didn't even want to see it once, but that's what came through, and that's what I delivered.
Yeah. So it's really interesting. It's kind of like we're studying life. We're studying, like, the work of it all, like the workings of it all.
Yeah, on a deeper level sometimes. We, as readers, people come in, love life, work life, money, health. Those are the things that people generally ask about. Sometimes they'll ask about higher things, and sometimes there are mediumship readings and other kinds of readings. But there's another thing that comes through when you do this work, and it's that level we were just talking about, where it's like, the curtain opens up and we see there's other mechanisms going on, spiritual mechanisms. There are other aspects to life that we're not told about. That the future on some level is sort of is up ahead. We haven't caught up to it. Yet we can change it. We have free will. And most people think in a binary way. It's either black or it's white. I was thinking, no, it's not black and white. It's black and white. And maybe gray in the middle.
Yeah.
And we have to have the flexible mind to say, we can sometimes see the future, but we can also affect it or change it. But sometimes we can't. Sometimes that brick wall is going to be there no matter what you do.
Yeah.
You're just going to have to, your nose is going to have to hit the brick wall before you understand there's a brick wall there.
Yeah. Well, is there anything else? Yeah. I wanted to ask you, like, how can people find you if they want to know, if they want to look into your writings, either like with Squirrel Girl or your other writings, or your psychic services if you're offering that?
I don't do as much psychic work, but I never say no when someone needs help. But my writing, my books are on Amazon under the name Will Murray, most of them. I do write under other names. I have a website, www.adventuresinbronze. That's all one word, adventures, plural, in bronze, .com. And my email address is adventuresinbronze@gmail.com, all one word. So people can see my books there. And I want to talk about one book that might especially interest this group. I channeled a book years ago.
Yeah.
We never got into it. Forever After. Can you see that?
Yes.
It's a spiritual book. I'll read you the back cover blurb. I'm very proud of this book. It's got great reviews. God awakens from a deep hibernation. He has no memory. He does not know who he is. He is utterly alone. There exists only the light of his consciousness, for there is no creation, not yet. Having no resources other than his effulgent mind, the Almighty proceeds along a mysterious path, a path of self-discovery in which he undertakes to solve the greatest mystery, not only of all time, but of the time before time began, the internal enigma of who God is and how he came to be. Basically, God wakes up with amnesia and not only has to figure everything else, but he has to create everything from scratch in order to understand who he is and where he is and what everything is.
Wow, beautiful. That is like a really cool sounding book. And you channeled it, you said.
I channeled it.
That's amazing.
Reluctantly. And that's a story I maybe tell you another time. It's a long story, but reluctantly channeled the book, and it's a really amazing book, if I say so myself, because I didn't really write it. I channeled it.
Yeah. I love books like that. That's so cool. I'm definitely I want to find that book and read it.
This is not on my website, but this is on Amazon under the name William Patrick Murray, which is my full name.
Okay.
And I'll be very interested to see if we get an uptake of sales from this podcast.
Yeah. I'd love to read it, and I would love to maybe like talk to you more about it another time.
Absolutely. It's a fast read because it's not one of those heavy channel books. It's short chapters, quick, and it's very accessible. It's written in a sort of a simplified biblical way, but not really the Bible style of writing, but kind of like the simple communication of complex ideas.
Awesome.
Hard to describe, but it's a very interesting book.
Cool. I can't wait to read it. And I'm so excited now I get to share our interview with my viewers, and I know they're going to love everything you had to say. Had such an awesome time talking with you, Will. Thank you so much for coming on my podcast.
Well, you're welcome. Thank you for inviting me. This has been fun. We've gone way around in many different directions, but we've covered some things, I think.
Yeah, I think so. I think it was valuable, definitely.
Good.
Yeah, and good. Thank you for the reading too. Thank you so much.
Oh, you're welcome. That was fun.
Yeah, it was. All right, so I'm going to say goodbye to the viewers now, and then I'll come back on and do a little reading for you.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
Thank you, guys. Thank you for watching this episode, and see you in the next one. Bye.
Bye now.
Mysteries now unfold, shadows whisper, tales untold. Kimomo's heart beats fast, revelations here on last.
Well, thank you for the reading. That was very good.
Oh, thank you.
Well, I had a good time, and this was fun. It was a good experience. I think you're a good interviewer, so that's good.
Thank you. All right, I'm going to start. Hi, Will. Thank you for joining my podcast. Everyone, this is Will Murray. He is known, I think, to a lot of people maybe as a comic book artist. He's also a writer.
No.
He's a writer in...
Not artist. Nope.
Okay, I'll start over. So,
right.
So you don't do the art. You write it.
I just write.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Sorry.